Guru. Kill the guru.
First of all, the American people never really, as a whole, went on a low-fat diet. So let's dispense with this idea that we actually followed the food pyramid and reduced our fat considerably. We went from, like, if you are to believe the most extensive statistics, we went from maybe 40% in the 50s to about 37% in the 70s, and we're now down to a whopping 33% or something like that. So, I mean, we're not low fat. So this whole idea that this is untested is so ridiculous to me, because if you look at cultures around the world, I mean, 30% is high fat. It's double the fat that they're eating.
Right.
So, I mean, and I'm not even an advocate. I'm not saying you have to eat a low-fat diet or you should eat a low-fat diet. I'm just saying, look at what all of these cultures have been eating, and were eating in the 50s and in the 1800s and in the 1700s and so forth. It was, mostly very low fat, like 10%, 10 to 20%. And relatively low protein. That's always kind of shocked me, also around the 10%.
Right.
And then very high carb. And, I certainly am not a big fan of the 80-10-10,
right.
Which tends to be mostly a vegan or vegetarian movement. But those macro ratios are not all that far off from a lot of the cultures when you go and look in the scientific literature of people who actually went and spent time and lived with these cultures and assessed what they actually ate and took the time to write it up into, a peer-reviewed journal, which back then kind of meant something a little bit more than it certainly does today. The older articles on, traditional diets and things like that, they're very readable. I mean, they're not real scientific verbiage laced things. They really talk about, what people ate, the basic foods, and then, some of them don't go into the macronutrient breakdowns, but most of them do, if it's in a nutrition article, and it's really quite eye-opening, in that regard, because, there's it's a total myth that humanity as a general, in general, at least for the last several hundred years, I would say, was anywhere near a low carb, high fat society. Yeah. And we have this obesity problem, basically, quote unquote, started around the 1970s. So I'm a little bit older than you. I basically grew up exactly in line with this obesity epidemic. And so I remember how we ate in the 60s before this happened. I remember all the dieting crazes of the 70s that surely helped it along. And, why do we have to go back? Especially, this is my biggest issue with paleo. Why do we need to go back to, 20,000, 30,000 years ago and beyond to solve the problem that is a modern day problem? It started in the 70s, and maybe, you can see where things, seeds were planted in the early 1900s.
Guru.